Good evening and welcome to the most speculative show on the airwaves right now. This is the pre-budget discussion for the budget, which is due to be tabled on the 21st of October, this Friday, by the Honorable Prime Minister. Speculative because, of course, we don't know for certain what other components will be going into the budget, but we can sort of predict based on what we have at our disposal, economic data, just where the budget is going. Now, many things have been said about Budget 2016. Some call it a Robin Hood budget, where certain quarters of society have been, according to perception, dealt well, slightly heavier hand, while other quarters of society have received a huge amount of allocations under Budget 2016. It is left to be seen as to how far these new allocations will go and where they will be seen again or not in Budget 2017 is anybody's guess. Moving forward, and before we start off the discussion, we have to note the backdrop of the economy. The global picture is rather bleak at the moment. A recovery in the oil price, albeit slight, has the boys at the Ministry of Finance breathing a sigh of relief, I'm sure. But before we get into talking about Budget 2017, let's take a look at Budget 2016, a quick recap of what was tabled last year, twice. Once in October and once, of course, in January. So here's some of the figures that we can pull together for you. The basic allocation of the budget went into 215 billion for operating expenditure, and the whole budget was at 267.2 billion, meaning 52 billion was left for developmental spending. However, 52 billion was taken out for contingency reserve. Now, if we look at the rest of the figures that we've got for you, this is gross domestic product from Q3 and Q4 of 2015. You can see a slight decline on 4.5% from 4.7% in Q3. As we move on to the next year, you will note these figures change slightly, and the projection for Q1 only at 1%. Now, overall, the budget expected growth to be at only 4 to 4.5%, and this was the recalibrated budget of January 2016. In Q2, we note the growth did not really hit any percentage point increase. However, there was a slight decrease at 0.7%. Let's look at the sectors that contribute to this growth. A quick take at the services sector will show you that there was an increase in Q2. However, this is largely due to fintech and technologies surrounding the banking sector, which, however, sadly contributed to some layoffs in the banking and financial sector. 26% of private sector layoffs were in the financial and banking sector, largely buoyed by an increase in take-up on fintech. Let's move on to manufacturing, where we'll see a decline in growth. And this is not just for Malaysia. Globally, manufacturing has shrunk, and this is largely due to the demand from China, which of course around the world has been known to grow at double digits this year and the year before, only charting single-digit growth, meaning that of course demand from China for products from around the world has shrunk significantly. Let's take a look at growth in construction. Q2, of course, saw construction boom to 8.8%. And this is largely due to take-ups of projects for the LRT extensions and the MRT, which is due to, of course, be fully completed by early next year. Q3 and Q4, however, may project different figures for the construction industry as the take-up for all these projects, all these infrastructure projects, will no longer be there to support that growth. And we look at some sectoral growth for cross-fixed capital formation at 0.1% and private final consumption at 5.3% in 2016's Q1. Q2 will reflect slightly different figures. Let's take a look at the Q2 figures now. Gross fixed capital formation was at 6.1% and private final consumption at 6.3%, up 1% from Q1. Let's take a look at the next slide that we've got for you. This is a quick recap, once again, of the current economic scenario that's, well, something on everybody's mind. Where's oil going to be at tomorrow? It's anybody's guess, really, but for now, our data will show you that last year, in 2015, Oil was at $48 a barrel, and early this year dropped to $30 to $35 per barrel. However, there is a slight recovery, seeing as how OPEC has finally agreed to agree on something. And just the news that they were going to agree on something pushed the oil price up significantly. So we're looking at a very good yield for the country, seeing as how projections have now focused on oil being at $40 to $45 dollars per barrel. However, it might hit the $50 per barrel mark, and that will definitely bring significant returns to the country. Moving forward, the budget revision for 2016 did show savings of up to 9 billion ringgit. Where were these savings, and how did we manage to accumulate 9 billion ringgit in savings? Well, we'll try to break that down for you later in the discussion. But let's move forward and take a look at the next slide. Now, real quickly, the fiscal deficit was at 3.1%. We're hoping to, of course, achieve zero deficit by 2020, and it looks like we're on track. What does this mean, really, for the average Malaysian on the street, that we have a fiscal deficit of 0% or 3%, and how we've reduced this fiscal deficit year on year from 6%? Does this really impact any part of your life as a Malaysian? We're going to discuss that to some detail. Now, the revision of Budget 2016 was based on the Brent crude oil price, which hit 30 to 35 US dollars, and hence a slight and a significant drop, really, in revenue for the country. However, GST did support us in this dark hour. We're going to look at GST and should the concept be revisited a little. GST is here to stay. However, massaging that into society may take a while, as the reality hasn't quite hit the Malaysian bottom line. Now, GDP is projected to grow at 4 to 4.5%, down from the projection of last year, which was 4 to 5%. This is, of course, much better than most developed economies, which only grow at 1 to 2%. If you look at Europe and the United States, 1% to 2% is the new norm. China is also recording single-digit growth year on year, and 4 to 5%, or 4 to 4.5%, does seem to be somewhere of a sweet spot for this region. Let's hope to achieve that by the end of the year. You saw earlier the Q1 figures and Q2 figures were not so encouraging, 1% and 0.7% respectively. Government debt is 55% of GDP, which is, of course, still good news compared to other economies in the region. And finally, some key issuings in the budget revision or recalibration of 2016. Let's take a look at the next slide real quickly. The government did not peg the ringgit to the dollar, which would have been disastrous, looking at how the dollar has now quite run away from us. The latest figures showing at $1 to 4.16 ringgit. The government has allocated 5 billion for the fund, PTPTN, and for contributions to the EPF. This cut allows more consumption and allows more disposable income for contributors to the Employment Provident Fund. And finally, keys to consider moving forward. Everyone knows these basic keys. If you have read the newspapers recently or seen any economic data, you'll know this is going to play a key role in the tabling of the budget. Global crude oil prices, of course, the Brexit, although it will have a minimal impact, seeing as how our relationship to that zone is not too significant. But the U.S. election will definitely play a big role, seeing as how the current administration is supportive of the TPP. But on the other side, Mr. Trump does not seem to favor such agreements. Hillary Clinton, before this, she called the TPP the gold standard. However, she has backtracked just slightly. So we may see adjustments to that all-important, all-encompassing Trans-Pacific agreement, which Barack Obama's administration has currently pushed forward in the region. Now, that's a backdrop of the economy globally and a little revisit of Budget 2016. Just before we take a dive into Budget 2017, I'm sure you've got your own wish list, but we went out to the street. We asked the everyday Malaysian. We've also asked some prominent figures in Malaysia, including a senator, of what their wish list would be like for Budget 2017. Let's take a look at this little poll discussion before we get into conversation with our guest in the studio.
For 2017, our wish list for the rubber glove industries especially is the extension and expansion of the reinvestment allowance. If the government can do that, we will be very happy, and that will bring us to the third phase of our automation and modernization of our industry.
I would prefer if the government could reduce the cost on the public transport, especially the RT, and then increase the efficiency of the transportation system in the country.
If your drive is towards industrialization, making Malaysia a business hub, offer more incentives, tax-free incentives for pioneer status for overseas investors.
As educator, I hope the government could still maintain the existing budget for the poor, like reviving the tuition voucher.
I really hope that the allowance for disabled persons, not to mention only EPC or Bantuan Am, a special allowance called Disability Living Allowance, kos sara hidup bagi OKU dan keluarga-keluarga ataupun individu yang termiskin harus diadakanlah. I mean, it must be introduced in this new budget.
Welcome back, and as you can see, I've taken a seat. I hope you have too, and I hope that you've had your dinner. This is a great time to digest some economic data and also put your economic thinking caps on. If you're planning your family's finances, this also would be a great time to discuss about your own personal finances moving forward. The budget will be tabled on the 21st of October. We're sort of speculating, looking at what we hope will come out of the budget, and we're also going to lay down some figures for you, so stay tuned. This is the discussion before the discussion, the prelude to the budget, which will be tabled this Friday. Joining me in discussion, and really on the hot seat today, we have Dr. Nur SHAHRIER, who is a senior lecturer with the Faculty of Economic and Management, UKM. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And we also have Dr. MUHAMMED KHALED, who is an economic analyst, coming to us this evening. He's got all the economic data, the tip of his fingers, and also on his notes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. This is, of course, as I said, a discussion that will also take into account the feedback that we saw earlier. So we've seen a very varied wish list.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on our poll and the response that we got from the everyday Malaysian?
Okay, so you're addressing me first?
Yes, Dr. Noel.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
So pretty much I think the feedbacks from the audience just now, from the people that you have interviewed, it shows, you know, what the previous budgets have covered. Okay, so for example, the disability allowance, the reduce in the cost of public transportations, the increase in the efficiency. So these were the things that have been covered in the previous budget. Okay, so let me touch on the allowance for the disability people, or you know, any kind of allowance that people are hoping that the government will increase. Okay, ultimately, typically, as households, what matters to us is not our nominal income. What matters is the real income. So if if let's say previously people with disability or B40 groups, they used to get certain amount of allowance, but then with the increase in the cost of living, they were unable to purchase the basket of goods that they used to purchase before.
Right.
So the increment that the government needs to take into account should be able to maintain at least their real purchasing power. So in other words, you know, if previously they are able to buy certain basket of goods, so for this year and then for next year as well, they can still maintain that amount of goods and services that they can afford to buy.
Well, that's an interesting balance that the government has to strike. Automation seemed to be something that one of the people polled did bring up, but automation has caused loss of jobs, especially in the private sector. I mentioned earlier, 26% of the jobs that were lost were to automation in the financial and banking sector, and a total of 35 to 38,000 layoffs last year from the private sector. So, Dr. Muhammad, do you think that automation is really the way to go? Should we be a little bit more labor intensive? Perhaps not the blue-collar worker, but the white-collar?
Correct. It depends. If automation resulted in less demand for foreign labor or low-skilled workers, then it's the right thing to do. But if automation reduce jobs, that's important to us, maybe you want to rethink, especially now. Now, labor market is not doing well. Number of unemployed has been going up. Last year, it grew by about 10%. This year, year on year, number of unemployed almost double-digit every month since January. At the same time, people are losing their job. Firms are not hiring. So, if you also encourage automation that replace workers, then you're going to have a problem. Workers still important. Because otherwise, who's going to buy your stuff? Robots not going to buy your stuff.
Correct.
So how do you balance that? If automation is for reducing foreign labor or low-skilled jobs, then it should be encouraged. If it's to replace other types of skill, I don't think we might want to rethink.
Dr. Narayan?
Yes, I sort of agree with Dr. Mohammed. So for corporations, theoretically, what matters to them is their profit margin, okay, their markup. So in any corporations, whether it is the financial institutions or construction companies or the manufacturing companies, what matters, the main priority is the profits. Okay, so why doesn't the construction sectors, on the other hand, move to automation? Why do they rely on the foreign workers instead of like depending on the automation or high technologies, right? It's because it is cheaper in terms of their input cost to hire the foreign workers than to switch to the automations.
Right.
On the other hand, in the financial sectors, what type of workers are we laying off? Are these high-skilled workers? If they are high-skilled workers, hopefully they can be easily absorbed into other sectors. You know, so otherwise we have to the government has to formulate the policies on what are we going to do with these high-skilled workers that we don't have, because it might lead to the brain drain. They might move elsewhere as well.
Absolutely, those are very salient points. Unemployment stands at 3.5%. But looking at how layoffs have been kind of a key feature and a lot of front page covers, I hope that, you know, moving forward, corporations will not look to continue that trend. We saw a wish list request for recalibration of tax, especially for pioneer status businesses and corporations. Would the tax bracket shift for corporations especially help? We see candidates for the US election now debating that and how their high tax on their own businesses are driving American businesses abroad. Will we see a reflection of that in Malaysia? Dr. Mohammed?
Tax is important for cost of doing business, but that's not the only factor that stimulate the economy, encourage firms to invest or to bring in FDI. If you look during 1990s, our tax rate, corporate tax rate is much higher than now. Even now, you look at China, corporate tax rate is much higher. Many countries, corporate tax rate is much higher. What is equally important is the quality of labor force, the corporate governance, for instance, infrastructure. That's equally important. There's no proof in the academic research you reduce corporate tax, economy would grow. There's no direct correlation. Other factors also important. In Malaysia, we reduce corporate tax by 1%, personal income, that was last year. 2 years ago, we reduced personal income tax 1 to 3%. This is because of GST. I think it is okay, the current tax rate. Other incentive, especially to help the low income or middle class, I think is much more important.
So you're looking at restructuring personal tax as opposed to corporate tax, giving people more disposable income. Cost of living is something that's high on everybody's priorities. When we come back, we're going to take a quick look at the cost of living and how it impacts your bottom line. Don't go anywhere.
Please reduce the house price so that everybody can afford. எல்லாமே வந்து afford பண்ணலாம் அந்த house. You see, definitely everybody wants an asset for them. So this is a way that PM can help us just to decrease the house pricing. வீடு price இறக்கிடலாம்.
I think a lot of property developers start suffering the slowdown lah. The sales is not as good as last time, yet the overheads are there, kind of things, and so therefore, ACCM would like to suggest to government that we look at these policies. In fact, we should encourage that this sector to grow healthily. We don't expect to have another quick hot jump kind of things, but at least government should start to step in and not those policies that those days being used during this very, very fast growth economy. Today, I think we should not be used lah.
We expect the government will come out some good idea to stimulate Malaysian business. Basically, now cost of doing business in Malaysia has gone up. So we must come out some measurement to reduce cost of doing business, and at the same time we must stimulate the business. Now we can see generally foreigners are doing business in Malaysia. They came under the name of exhibitors, but they are doing the business. We should take control of them. I think the immigration is the right time during the festival season. Just go into all the Gerai, look at that. In the budget, we expect the government to introduce some measure to control all these foreign workers.
Welcome back to the pre-budget discussion. Another wish list there. Let's also look at housing, which is something of high priority for everyone. But on the flip side of that discussion, Luxury Real Estate Property Agents Association announced that 1,000 high-end purchases have entered the market, and the market cannot cater for these new 1,000 purchases. These are individuals of high net worth, and they've just entered the market space, so they've just qualified to purchase high-end property, but there is none available. 420 units, that's what it would take. At this point in time, 420 units is all there is on the market space, but a total of 1,000 new high-end purchases are in the market for high-end houses. So we're going to take a look at the other side of that discussion, where individuals like our first commenter on the poll there stated that houses should be affordable. Now let's look at the various schemes. 35,000 ringgit for a house under the PPR system. BSN and Bank Rakyat will offer a financing package of up to 4%. So this is something that I believe everyone can afford. And there is also the first-time home buyer scheme, where residential homes priced at 300,000 ringgit and below are restricted to first-time home buyers only. So with these two schemes in place, it's left to question, is the take-up rate sufficient? Are there enough homes on the market? Or do buyers have access to these schemes? So those are questions that I will be asking my guests, but momentarily, there you go, the affordable housing scheme again. This is more than 100,000 ringgit property units from JPN, Prima, SPNB, and the like. So there are many agencies that cater for these individuals who would like to purchase their first house. Access to these schemes, however, is probably something that we should be discussing. And this is the figure that I brought up earlier, 35,000 ringgit for a house. If you don't call that affordable, I really don't know what is, because there's 4% interest on your financing from an institution to help you purchase the house. So really some prudent financial management on the individual side might be an issue here. But let's leave the housing discussion for a while, and let's come back and talk to our guests about tax. Once again, we have Dr. Nurain SHAHRIER, Senior Lecturer, Faculty of Economic Management, UKM, and Dr. Muhammad Abdul KHALED, Economic Analyst. When we left our earlier discussion, we were talking about tax, and you mentioned, Dr. Muhammad, that tax is not the only reason why businesses move around. What are some of the other factors, you think?
So, businesses always complain tax too high, right? Businessmen, tax too high. In fact, they're paying effective lower tax rate than a wage earner. I'll give you an example. An average income earner, let's say he has an income of 100,000, 110,000 easy a year. He pay about 24%. Businesses, also business tax is about 24%. But businessmen, you don't pay only 24%. Your income is not only from business. Your income also from buy, sell shares, from property, from inheritance, the taxes on these items, flipping property, zero. Even you make 100,000, you pay zero. You buy and sell shares, you make 100 grand, you pay zero. If somehow my parents give me, okay, I love you, I give you 100,000, I pay zero. Average worker who does not have all this, I'm going to pay 24%. So effectively, if you're a businessman, you pay much, much less. That's why Warren Buffett said, the billionaire in America, he said, my secretary pay higher tax than me. Right? And we have room to increase our revenue by considering to implement taxes on this item, especially inheritance tax or capital gain tax. Inheritance tax, we had it before. We cancelled it, I think 93 or 94, we cancelled it off. We should consider taking this tax. Instead of lowering, I would ask for pushing up the tax.
But we do have a sort of super tax now for these high-end individuals. And the concern was that these high-end individuals, high net worth individuals, are also very mobile.
Yeah.
They can move from country to country and reposition their taxes.
Correct.
Has that happened, do you think? We've increased the tax
Yeah.
to cater for them.
Correct.
Have they moved?
I don't think they will move. Where else you can get a maid so cheap? You can get drivers so cheap. You get the bodyguard so cheap, right? It's not as easy as I'm going to transfer everything out. I go and move out, right? But
true.
they can transfer the tax offshore,
right?
And on. Yeah.
I think the mobility of these high-end net worth individuals do not depend solely on the how much tax that the government is going to impose on their net worth, but it also depends on their confidence in the country, how safe is their wealth.
Correct.
For example, a lot of these individuals, they transfer their money to like safe haven countries like the Cyprus, the
Cayman Islands.
yeah, Cayman Islands, where else? Swiss, maybe. Still have this protectionism towards the wealth of this type of individuals. Well, if you may, can I just elaborate a little bit on the tax
Corporate
just
tax,
now? Okay,
right.
corporate tax. So the governments need to raise its revenue. Okay, it can either come from borrowing or it can either comes from the tax. And then currently, to increase the tax on the M40 or definitely not on the B40 is very, very undesirable. So the corporate tax is what the government can target. Okay. One way that the government can do is that to give tax rebate. Okay, if these corporations they have two options. Okay, so the money that they save from the tax, they can either invest it in the gross capital formation, which will generate the employment in the economy, or they can invest it in the financial markets. If they invest it in the financial market, there won't be any multiplier impact to the economy. So it's not good to stimulate growth. On the other hand, if they invest in the gross capital formation, there will be a multiplier impact, and in a way, we can generate the employment. So if the companies do embark from this tax money that they save, from this extra money that they save, they embark on the investment in the real sectors, then the government may consider giving them some tax rebate. Okay?
So we give them a rebate if they fulfill a social requirement, so to speak,
Yes.
which is the creation of jobs.
Yes, because like after the 1997 Asian financial crisis, we have savings glut problem. The corporations in ASEAN countries were hoarding their cash instead of like putting and invest back in the real sectors. So that was, saving glut was a coin tossed by Bernanke, the saving investment imbalance in the world. So basically, Asian countries were saving a lot.
Well, we are facing a slightly different situation right now. People are saying that the personal bottom lines are being hit from every angle.
Yeah.
Let's look at GST since we're talking about tax.
Okay.
Now, here's an opinion. Why don't we just introduce a lower rate of GST, but remove all these prorated items from the basket and just, impose one set of a lower tax, a lower GST for everything? So, accounting becomes easier, and there may just be a slightly significant increase in collection, albeit a smaller impact overall on the economy. Dr. Muhammad, your opinion?
It will hit the poor the most. Why? Singapore did that approach.
Right.
Lower GST.
But all over.
All over. But here, GST is regressive. You spend more, you pay more. The rich don't spend all the income, they save. The poor, they spend most of the income. And this is consumption tax. The more you spend, the more you pay. If you put lower rate, but you cover all higher tax for them. That's why I think it was correct. Slightly revenue positive, about 6%, but bulk of the items that consumed by the low income was exempted, particularly food. 9 out of 10 households spend the most on food, and we exempted food. Not only that, I think it was also correct that you give cash transfer to dampen the GST impact. But I have to also mention certain items you might want to consider not having GST tax. For instance, for milk. Now milk, for infant milk, there's no GST. But you buy milk for your kids, there's no GST. For toddlers, you pay GST. Certain items that low-income users no need GST. You can compensate by increasing higher personal income tax for the super rich.
What do you think, Dr. Narayan?
So I think if the government were to lower the GST rates, that is, let's say if the government lower it to 2% or 3% to make it comparable to other countries, and then in the years to come, they decided to increase it again. So that is not going to be a popular or even acceptable measures. So might as well you stick with this 6% GST tax rates, but instead, the misperception and misconceptions or negative perceptions that people have on this GST is because of where does the money go? Where does the revenue go? Okay, if you have said that you collected such and such which exceeded your forecast, but where do you spend this money? Okay, so how come with this GST collection, it needs to be accompanied with the toll hikes. It needs to be accompanied with the reductions in other developmental sectors. You see, so that is the factors that make people feel like GST is burdening them. Okay, so because of and another factor is because of the leakages in the government expenditure as well. Okay, we heard a lot in the newspapers recently about the corruptions, about the mismanagement of the funds, and the governance overall. So the intended purpose of GST is good, but why would it need to be accompanied by
all these hikes?
Yes, by these hikes, and also with the news on the leakages and
on top of that, we know the Pan-Borneo Highway will be toll-free. And that's a lot more road than we have here. It is going to be toll-free when it's completed, but here in the peninsula, I think we can expect almost biennial increase for toll rates. So that needs to be really justified as to why these increases are accompanying GST. I think that's a very valid argument. Dr. Mohammed.
No, I mean, people feel the increase in cost of living, particularly because income has not grown. Wages has not grown.
Even with the minimum wage?
Minimum wage is a minimum wage. We increased last year during the budget and we revised. But half of the worker in KL, for instance, last year, the wage grew by 0%. In fact, in real terms, you minus inflation is negative. But at the same time, cost of living has increased, particularly food items, right? The only thing that has not grown, has not increased, is transport prices, because fuel prices is low. But if fuel prices goes up, it's going to be much more difficult. Cost has gone up, your income has moved south. Cost has moved north. Would it be better? I doubt so. It's not going to be as easy. Like Terence, you mentioned earlier, labour market not doing well. Right? You have excess of labour, why should I pay you more?
But let's look at these government expenditures, the 215 billion for expenditure per se. A lot of it is statutory. They have to spend X amount on pensions, on emoluments, and there are requirements to diverse these funds or divulge these funds to the various states. So most of it is statutory. And that 40-some billion, 50 billion really, which has been spent on development is the increase, is the deficit. So moving forward, when we look at a more pragmatic budget, what should the government do? Should they be restructuring all these payments, emoluments, and contracts?
Yes, you're right, because bulk of the government budget is allocated towards the operational expenditure.
Right.
Okay, so only I think about 50 billion that is direct towards the development expenditure, right? In the operational expenditure, yes, no doubt, the government we still need to pay the emoluments. They have to pay the wages, they have to pay the salaries, the pensions, because these are government's obligations towards the public servants. But things, a lot more could be saved from the operational side if there is no leakages like the one that general
read your mind.
No, like the one that general auditors will always report every year. Okay, so if we can save that amount, definitely we can direct more towards the development expenditure. And in the development expenditure as well, the focus should be on the sectors that can have greater fiscal multiplier impact to the economy. You don't want to put in the sectors that that has that can generate less growth, less employment in the economy. You wanted to target sectors that have greater multiplier impact. You see, so
well, let's digress a little and come back to that unaddressed issue of home ownership. 35,000 ringgit for a house under the PPR scheme with a 4% interest rate offered by Bank Rakyat and BSN. That would make a house pretty affordable.
Yes.
But the take-up rate doesn't seem to be there, and there seem to be still this glut of complaints that home ownership is difficult and they can't really meet the requirements to obtain a loan. And the sweet spot for developers is houses priced between 400 to 700,000. Otherwise, if they price it above 700,000, there are only so many people that can qualify for loans for houses with that kind of price tag. So what should the restructured home ownership program be like? Do we still need all these agencies? Do we need better access to funding? What do we need? What are we missing here, Dr. Mohammed?
There's a supply mismatch, supply-demand mismatch. You look, half of the Malaysian household can afford about 165,000 worth of house. How many houses are in that category?
In KL, Klang Valley, zero.
It's about 21%, right? Only 21% for 50% of the population. 1/3 of the house bill is a price more than $500,000 ringgit. How many Malaysians can afford? 1/3 of the house bill more than $500,000 ringgit. Only 5% of Malaysians can afford, right? People cannot afford because price too high. Even if our intervention is to say, maybe I want to give you financing. That's a wrong way to do it. You look what subprime doing, right? The way is to reduce price of houses. Private sector not doing. I think the government is correct to do through those agencies that you mentioned. Last year, I think the government allocated 1.6 billion to Prima, and we hope that the budget will continue to give big chunk to Prima to build affordable housing.
But we look at the glut of supply in the brackets that you mentioned, 500,000 to $1 million ringgit. What is going to happen to all these houses? The take-up rate may be there. Some people may buy with the hope of flipping the property quickly and then find that they're stuck with the property and they have to finance that loan. So with this glut in supply, what is going to become of our property market? Are we looking at a bubble, Dr. Narain?
So theoretically in economics, when you have the supply exceeding the demand, okay, to meet the equilibrium, you have to lower the price. Okay, theoretically. But the thing is that the developer is very unwilling to do those things, to embark on like lowering the price. So the question is that, how much of the profit margin, the markup that these developers are having on the cost of building the houses itself? Is it 100% above the, on top of the initial cost of building these houses? So, so basically...
They claim margins are razor thin.
So yeah, that is because I am not quite sure, but, how does the property, like the cost of like building the house and stuff like that. Some people, they prefer to just buy land and then hire their own contractors because they can get the houses at cheaper price. So if you continue to let these houses being abandoned without occupants, without buyers or without renters, then eventually you need to put in money for the maintenance fees. Okay.
True.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a situation where things are getting really interesting. We are talking about tax. We've done a little bit on GST, and we're focused a little on the housing bubble, so to speak. We have a glut in property exceeding 1 million ringgit. Not many Malaysians can afford prices with those kind of price tags, so it doesn't seem that this bubble is going to go anywhere, this glut of property in the high-end category. However, when we come back, we're going to focus on other sectors that require some analysis. We're also going to take a look at another viewer poll. So when we come back, we're going to look at cost of living. How do we help manage that bottom line for the individual? Don't go anywhere. The pre-budget discussion. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back in just a minute. We're back on the pre-budget discussion for Budget 2017. We've had several rounds of discussion on tax. We've focused on the housing issue, and if you're looking at purchasing a house, I personally don't think this is the year to do that. But then again, correct me if I'm wrong. We're going to move on and talk about the cost of living, high on everybody's mind. What is causing this increase in cost? GST is said to have played a role, and the inflation rate is at 1.5%. So let's turn to our guest right now. Dr. Nurain, what do you think has really impacted the high cost of living?
The high cost of living is because, as I had mentioned earlier, is between your nominal consumption and your real consumptions. So nominal consumptions, you may have, slight increase or increase in your income, but that is not commensurate to the increase in the prices. The increase in the prices, even though like GST is zero exempted across certain products, but the companies, the firms, sometimes they do have profiteering. So the price keep on increasing. So as a result, the real income, real consumption decline. So even if the housing that the government is offering is really low, but then the thing is that people real consumption is declining. That means if in the past they can afford to buy certain number of goods, but now they no longer can afford to sustain that type of living. And plus with the perceptions on how the economy is going to move forward. Okay.
But this doesn't look like the picture that we want to see. We're looking at a high-income nation by 2020, which means that we should be a $15,000 per household, per annum kind of society. But we don't seem to be moving in that direction. If we're complaining about the high cost of living, something must be going wrong in the whole economic scenario. Dr. Mohammed.
Yeah, the country can be high income. The people not necessarily high income. Even you look now, we are not even high income. We don't earn high wages. Half of the Malaysian workers currently earn less than $1,700, $1,600. Even in KL, half of the KL workers earn less than 2,200. This is high income state. In fact, if you KL GDP per capita same as Korea. And yet, half of the workers earn less than 2,200 bucks per month. How do you increase this? People feel cost of living going up because one, wages do not grow up, like I mentioned earlier. And second, food item, your expenditure has been going up. Profiteering is one thing. I give you an example. Price control list for Raya includes chicken. It was the price control list ends on the first day of Raya. Price control about $7.80, first day of Raya. Second day of Raya, it become 9 ringgit. People say, why is this? How can you control the first day, second day it become 9 ringgit? One. And second, our ringgit has dropped. About 20% since last year. We import a lot of stuff. Milk, 95%, beef, 70%, vegetables and fruits, about 30 to 40%. It costs much more, all right? And the third one, of course, your income did not grow. You feel cost has been going up. What can we do then?
Right. So the only thing to do would be to reinvest our money into sectors which have real growth, hoping that these sectors will now become pockets of new wealth, attracting new companies to form, new startups, generating more jobs. So should we look at the digital economy as a proverbial savior? We're opening or creating new cyber hubs across the greater Klang Valley. And there is demand for these products. Fintech, for example, we talked about how fintech has a crushing impact on the financial sector, but it's a lot more than just fintech. There are a lot of other technologies that are components of the digital economy. Dr. Nurain, do you think we should be focusing on the digital economy and transforming Malaysia into a digital hub for the region?
Yes, I think I agree with you. So basically, currently in our services sectors, for example, what type of services, what are the component of the services that we are focusing on? Because services sectors is the major part of the economy now. We have graduated from like manufacturing to the services components now, services industries now. So, but then the IMF studies, if I recall, they have stated that Malaysia's services sectors is focusing on the low export sophistication. Okay, so such as the transportations, the tourism industries. So these are the sectors of low sophistications. It do not need so much of invention or so much of the creativity or high skills. Basically, tourists can come here, we can export our buses to them, we can export our hotels to them, our restaurants. So these are, sort of like low export sophistications. On the other hand, it is highly encouraged that we should focus on the high export sophistication, like the insurance industries, the fintech, so we can generate greater growth if we are focusing on the services sectors that is of higher sophistications.
We also have these legacy sectors. Agriculture still is a huge component of the Malaysian economy. If you look at the sheer landmass for palm oil, it is still quite significant. We're the second largest producer of palm oil next to Indonesia. So with all these legacy industries in place, how then do we move up the value chain?
Certain things that Terence mentioned and Dr. Naik, my colleague, mentioned, you can increase income, but that's in the long run. What you want to also address, current challenges. Short-term, cost has been going up, income do not go up. What can we do? We have one instrument, BRIM, for instance. A lot of people say it's a waste of money. In a way, it is, but you can make it an instrument so that people can earn higher wages, higher income in the future. What do I mean by that? In other countries, including Philippines, cash transfer is not free. You make it conditional. I give you cash transfer, but I want to see your kids go to school. You want cash transfer, next year I want to see that you go in for medical checkup. Or in certain countries, I don't give you cash transfer, I pay for your children breakfast in school, nutrition. There are ways but this is important to help the short-term measures to help those low income or even middle class. Of course, you have to incentivize the program. That is number one. Number two, the short-term measures that you need to do, job market is not doing well. Malaysians do not save. Cost of living, you simply cannot save. What do you do if you lose your job? Bank Negara says, for every 100 Malaysians, only 6 can survive more than 6 months if you lose your job, lose main source of income. What the government should do, I think, to give credit, I think last year Prime Minister announced it, and I hope this year he said we're going to do it soon, to introduce unemployment insurance. If I lose my job, I have at least 3 months of my last salary. You can cap salary of 4,000. Even if you earn 10,000, you're going to get only 4,000 for 3 months, and that's zero cost to the government.
Who pays for the insurance?
You and me. I mean, you and RTM. Yeah. You pay 50-50. And it doesn't cost a lot.
Right. It doesn't cost a lot. But it is a cost, and people will see it that way.
To Dr. Muhammad's list, he mentioned the first list and the second list, and then the third list is that now, the booming of the internet business. So if the governments could encourage the employer as well to educate their staffs, their employees, to supplement the primary income with the secondary income by doing online business that do not affect like their jobs productivity, their working hours and stuff like that. Because online business is booming. It's something that everyone should explore and try to do, because the online business is not only targeting the domestic consumptions, but you can penetrate through the global market.
When we look at all these short-term measures, I guess we're also hoping that the individuals on the street, the recipients of the cash transfer programs, will look at how they can restructure their own finances. In countries like Mexico, they have a very positive feedback from economists that study that market on their cash transfer program, where it's conditional, like what you mentioned. Gone are the days, really, where we should think of these cash transfer programs as sheer wastage, and that the individuals who receive these cash transfer programs are going to stop working, because in reality it's only 10% of their income that we are actually giving them. So BRIM may be one component, but do you think we should add another component? Like in the US, they have food stamps. You were mentioning substituting children's breakfast. Should we add to that, but not with cash per se?
It should be specific. Maybe for old age, those in old age, we just give, no need condition. For those with families, maybe you want with school-going children, maybe for breakfast program. For single worker, maybe training, skills training. So it depends. It should be a multi-pronged approach. But there's also one low-hanging fruit. For low income, they pay a lot debt, especially when they buy consumer durables. We calculated, if you buy, especially those that 15 ringgit a week or 10 ringgit a week, total interest paid sometimes 150% because it's not regulated, right? If you can put on annual rate, they pay about 50% on buying fridge or buying TV. That unjust. Even you buy credit card, your interest is 18%. The rate should be lower, right? And you increase disposable income. This easy thing to do. It can be done tomorrow.
Well, let's hope it's done on Friday.
Hopefully, yes.
Public transport is also another thing high on the wish list. I mean, we look at the SPAD and they just released their 5-year report of public transport transformation over the last 5 years. And we see the projection for the MRT, we see the extension on the LRT lines, but has the cost of public transport also gone up and down? We've got Uber and Grab that sort of come in and disrupted the way taxis do their business. So where do we stand on public transport, seeing as how all these new developments have kind of come into the market? Dr. Narayan.
So I think from the report recently that I've seen, it says that the most efficient type of public transportation in Malaysia is the trains, right? So the MRT, the LRT, the commuter, and I commuting on the commuter as well, I find it very efficient. It arrives on time and stuff like that. But one thing that that bothers me is the increment in the cost of public transportations. You know, on one hand, you limit the parking spots in Kuala Lumpur, but then at the same time you increase the cost of public transportations. So you know, it's quite difficult if your objective is to encourage people to use more of the public transportations, but then at the same time you increase the cost of it. Okay, so that's one thing. And another thing is that in terms of the connectivity, but once I arrive at my destinations, I find it difficult for me to connect to my homes or to connect to my office. So the connectivity is lacking. So I'm not sure connectivity in terms of the bus or in terms of the you know, other mode of transportations, but the connectivity is not there. So that's why sometimes people just prefer to drive.
Despite the higher parking fees that we are incurring, which is a separate discussion altogether. Now, on the issue of connectivity, within KL alone, the government has spent millions on the Go KL bus program, which is free. So it's supposed to fill in those loops. But let's not confine our public transport discussion to KL. Let's look at the whole picture, Malaysia in total. Is public transport an issue in other states? Penang, Johor? Dr. Muhammad, what do you think? Where should we come in to support public transport in these areas, which are experiencing population growth as well?
It's a bit difficult to encourage people to use public transport when the car is still cheap. Car ownership in Malaysia is super high compared to other countries, right? Even tax on petrol there's no tax on petrol.
RON 95.
Right, you should put a GST on RON 97, right? You want to discourage big cars, gas guzzler. It's not good for the environment, right? At the same time, you get revenue. This also has to be managed, right? You cannot just talk about public transport at the same time you also don't do anything about private about cars.
Well, what are the car makers going to say about that? There are quite a few of them here. Anyway, we've reached the tail end of our discussion, and it has been quite exciting to see what's on the table. I do believe the boys at the Finance Ministry are still kind of punching those numbers and keying in the data, making sure they've got the best report possible to be tabled on the 21st of October. Many predict it will be a pragmatic budget. Can we get a one-line final word from the two of you to kind of round us up? Dr. Muhammad.
Okay. The budget should focus on enhancing productivity, skill formation, those that create jobs, and reduce less of money flow outside. That number one. Number two, we should not cut on productive investment. Scholarship, we should not cut. Basic services, health, we should not cut. These two main things that we should see in the budget.
Yes,
and Dr. Narayan.
Yes, the government allocations, the budget allocations should not be cut on the productive investment, especially the educations, because this is what going to determine our future. We want to produce future generations that is of high quality and knowledgeable. And then at the same time as well, the government has to take into account that the cost of living is rising, the real income, real consumption is going down. So, so that is something government has to take into account.
Friday is D-Day. Thank you very much, Dr. Narayan. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad, for joining us in conversation. This has been the pre-budget discussion. I'll be back on the 24th to weigh in on the budget. Then things won't be so speculative. We'll have actual figures to discuss. So join us on the 24th of October, 9 p.m. as well, for the post-budget discussion. My colleagues Kevin and Zaleha will be helming the actual budget discussion on the 21st of October. So look forward to the live tabling of the budget by the Honourable Prime Minister of Malaysia. Till then, this is Terence saying good night, Malaysia.